Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. Producer JL here today, just by myself. The rest of the crew is either taking a nice little break for the summer or they are busy tonight. So hopefully we'll have them back soon enough. But today won't be a long podcast. Excuse me. We'll just talk about some stuff that's happened over the last week and some of the rumors that have come out and some of the names that have been thrown around for the New York Rangers for July 1st coming up, and some interesting rumblings going on in terms of possible trades and what Chris Drury might potentially do. First and foremost, this is being recorded the day after the Florida Panthers have won the Stanley Cup, their first in franchise history, holding off the Edmonton Oilers for their 3-0 potential comeback. You looked at the discourse on Twitter, at the beginning of the series, a lot of us Ranger fans were, rightly so, were, kind of annoyed because we felt that there was sort of a missed opportunity with the Oilers just struggling. And many felt that if the Rangers were in that position, that they might have done a bit better. And who knows? That's an alternate reality that we really can't explore. Maybe the Rangers might have had a better series and maybe the Rangers might have won, all things considered, because the difference is that the Rangers have Igor Shesterkin and not Stuart Skinner. But the way hockey goes, you can't ever really predict. The Edmonton Oilers did a valiant job at attempting to come back and forcing a Game 7. And the series ended up getting a lot better because both teams really played their hearts out those last 4 games, or those last 3 games, rather, or 4 or 3 games, whatever you want to call it. So the Stanley Cup has been awarded. The season is over, and we quietly transition into another calendar year of NHL hockey. So what does that mean? So, as something we've talked about in our group chat, is that the NHL schedule has kind of been drawn out, so to speak. So the Stanley Cup final was, I'm recording this on a Tuesday, so it was Monday. And then the NHL draft is on Friday. And the awards are on Thursday. And then just a couple of days after that, you have Free Agent Frenzy, which you could see either on TSN or ESPN Plus or whatever, but that's when the free agency period starts. And I think that's when the new calendar year for the NHL begins. So everything kind of goes topsy-turvy on its head, and it kind of creates for a shorter offseason, so to speak. But with that being said, with the draft coming up, the Rangers have already made a couple of moves, or they've made one big move so far. First, they've obviously re-signed Kaapo Kakko, which I might have mentioned before, but they've re-signed Kaapo Kakko to a team-friendly 1-year bridge contract, kind of like a prove-it deal, similar to what Lafreniere got before. Also, that allows for Kakko to be moved because teams kind of know the value of a player and could potentially fit in a deal, for the draft. So that happened. And then Barclay Goodrow was placed on waivers and was claimed by the San Jose Sharks. Now, interesting little tidbits surrounding this story. If I want to remember, I want to say if this is correct or not, but one of the big reasons why Barclay Goodrow is upset is because he didn't want to go to San Jose. And I think one of the reasons why he had San Jose on one of his lists for teams to not be traded to was because of David Quinn. And I think maybe he just didn't want to go back to a team that's sort of rebuilding. You would think that a guy at his age, 32 years old, not old, but he's played NHL hockey for a very long time. And he definitely wants to try and win, maybe another Stanley Cup. He's got 2. So, but Barclay Goodrow was placed on waivers and was appropriately claimed by the San Jose Sharks. They were first in the queue, and Goodrow was apparently unhappy about that. And to Barclay, I just want to say thank you for your contributions as a Ranger, but deal with it, okay? Not everyone gets to make 3.6 million and gets to play hockey in California after winning 2 Stanley Cups. I think you've got it made pretty well. Maybe you can make a difference and turn that team around. I'm not trying to be petty with this or anything like that, but there are other things that you could potentially be upset about than playing hockey in a city that you know. So there's that. So that frees up about 3 and change for the Rangers in the salary cap. And look, I'll say this about Goodrow. I wasn't a major fan of the contract, but I wasn't totally against it like a lot of people were. And yeah, it might have been a slight overpay, but you have to remember at the time when Drury took over and the Rangers were looking to get more playoff experience and just kind of become a heavier team, a better defensive team, or more like grit team, so to speak. And Barclay Goodrow at the time kind of fit that mold. And I liked him, and he proved to be somewhat valuable for the first, first 2 years of his contract. It's just the contract was just too big for the salary cap. If you look at the way that the cap was supposed to go up, the 3.6 million that he would have been, that he would have had on the books for the Rangers would have been chump cheese, or chump change, rather. Chump cheese. I don't know why I said chump cheese. Chump change if the cap had gone up the way it was supposed to. But the NHL cries that they don't make money and that, they need to save money on this and they need to be very frugal with things. So the cap only went up slightly instead of, the way that it should have. So obviously he becomes a cap casualty. And I'm sure the decision was easier with his regular season. And look, you can give the guy some, cut the guy some slack a little bit. He basically had a piece of his mouth, a piece of his face get, come out on the ice. It's kind of hard to come back from those things. And he performed very admirable, in the 3 playoff series that he played with the Rangers. 2022, he played with that, busted ankle and was probably our best defensive center. And then we look at the run from this year, scoring a couple of big goals shorthanded, and the double overtime goal, and the 2-goal game against the Panthers. And he provided something, and he did his job. He did what he needed to do, and this is the perfect time for the Rangers to cut ties. And very clever move by Drury to put him on waivers and avoid the whole trading, no trade clause and whatnot. So best of luck to Barclay in San Jose. And he'll be fine. I'm not going to sit here and, be worried about a man who's made millions of dollars in hockey. So good. Best of luck to him. Now, you take a look at the Rangers accruing cap space, and with the cap getting going up a couple million more, which will allow the Rangers to have it's about a 4.5 million cushion that the cap is supposed to go up. Now we focus on the draft. Now, I'm going to save a lot of the draft predictions to Will Wright. And when Rob comes back on, I'm sure they're going to want to talk about prospects. So I'll keep that to them. But what I do want to talk about quickly is just potential moves. So it kind of seems like where there's smoke, there's fire. It seems to me that Chris Drury is doing his best to try and move on from big contracts, because just from his comments from after the season and just the way it seems like he's gone about things, especially with the Goodrow wave, it seems to me that Drury is really dead set. And, you could look at all the reports that Brooks and a bunch of other reputable reporters have put out there, is that Drury is really looking to shake things down for this team and really move, this team in a different direction. And that means moving, a couple of pieces that really didn't really work out for the Rangers this past postseason, because you can coast your way through the regular season for the most part. Obviously, that's a big part. And this is not discrediting the regular season at all, but there were multiple players on the team that were either compromised or just did not play to their standard of ability. Now, we can talk about Mika Zibanejad, we can talk about Chris Kreider, Artemi Panarin, all you want, but those guys are probably the least of the concerns, at least for the Rangers right now, in terms of trying to fix the problems that this team was facing. the big problem that this team had was just the fact that the depth scoring didn't really come through for the most part. And the fact that they were having trouble coming out of the neutral zone, or at least in the defensive zone, they were just having trouble breaking out. And who was one of the bigger culprits of doing that was none other than Jacob Trouba. Now, I like Jacob Trouba. I like when he's not injured and he can play sheltered minutes because he actually does bring somewhat of a heavy presence to a game. The problem is that over the last season or so, he's either been playing very compromised or his play just hasn't been up to par as what it should be. You know, he's been kind of miscast in his role here as a Ranger, and I know Dave has said it, Rob has said it, and many other people have said it. Jacob Trouba was essentially the Eric Gustafson in Winnipeg, and I will always use that comparison because that was a good comparison by Rob, who said that, whether it was on the podcast or on our group chat. And he was kind of like your third D pair who was able to put up points because he played with Dustin Byfuglien and Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele and Patrick Laine on those Winnipeg teams, and he has a decent shot for the power play. But then when the Rangers traded for him, he wasn't terrible right off the bat. It seems to me that there have been some injuries that have kind of prevented him from really becoming the player that he can be, and it's adversely affected a lot of his play. A broken ankle doesn't heal in 2 weeks. So even though he was quote unquote healthy for the playoffs, he was still playing compromised. And there was an injury that happened to him somewhat in December, and that kind of brought everything down. So Jacob Trouba was essentially playing compromised. And even when he was healthy, he was okay, especially with Keandre Miller, but he was still really not playing to the level that he should be. And unfortunately, with the forward issues that the Rangers need to address in terms of putting somebody with Kreider and Zibanejad, it's becoming a bit harder for the Rangers to justify paying Jacob Trouba $8.5 million to sit back and essentially be the worst defenseman on this team. And you don't want to really say that about a player on your team, but facts are facts. And him and Eric Gustafson were really big culprits in the playoffs in terms of just kind of really not helping the team's cause in terms of breakouts from the defensive zone. That's why the Florida Panthers were able to exploit that, and they were really able to bear down. The Carolina Hurricanes essentially did the same thing. It's one of the reasons why it wasn't a clean sweep, because game 4 and game 5, you can kind of pin on Jacob Trouba for the most part. And I mean, one of those games, they just had a complete and total defensive team breakdown on defense. That's different. But it also the same thing because Jacob Trouba was a part of that. So now there are rumblings going around that the Rangers may make a move to the draft, that they may put together a deal with Kakko and Trouba to potentially move up in the draft or maybe move down. But it seems to me that Chris Drury, just from a lot of the reports going around and just kind of, I like to say a lot, where there's smoke, there's fire. It's similar to the whole Barclay Goodrow thing when there was kind of the smoke surrounding that he might get traded to San Jose or he might get waived, and then it happened. With the Rangers getting a lot of money off the books this offseason and, teams making moves to kind of, add different players, I think the Rangers are going to continue to shop Trouba aggressively along with Kaapo Kakko. And then in the case of Kakko, you have to look at it this way. Unless something drastic changes, I don't think Kaapo Kakko is going to live up to the second overall hype that he can live up to. And I know Coach Connell in our chat has mentioned numerous times that Kakko's kind of had some, just the way that he kind of goes about certain things, it kind of adds to a lot of the issues that he's been having, just kind of with holding the puck and decision making, and just kind of not, just not really working on a lot of things that could make him better. And now this is no criticism on Kakko per se, where I'm, really trying to denigrate the guy, but it's just from what I've read and from what I've noticed, and you can also just see it. You know, he's a possession force. The guy can hold on to the puck into a corner and move it around to the best of to the best of anyone in this league. But the problem is there's no finish, no pun intended. We were so enamored. And I still think that player could be there somewhat, where we saw those highlights before the 2019 draft of just him dominating, being a real offensive force. But then you also have to remember that a lot of this took place on international ice. So that gives him more room to kind of navigate, and kind of allow himself to. And then also, not being, not having the best of coaches in the first 2 seasons with the first couple of years with, Gerard Gallant and David Quinn. But it gets to a point where the player has to persevere through that regardless. And obviously the Rangers did the right move in hiring Peter Laviolette and bringing in Dan Muse and a bunch of other coaches who can tailor to those skill sets. And it's really worked out for a lot of the players, including Alexis Lafreniere. So everybody thought that because of how well Kakko played in spurts last year, that it would translate over to this year. Unfortunately, it hasn't. And Kakko was, outside of a couple of shifts here and there, was kind of a ghost. And so now you have to think he's coming up. He's basically on a 1-year prove it deal, which is movable. That's the double edged part of it. So now you have to think, will someone take him to free up the cap? And will they put him in a trade with Jacob Trouba? Because then you're clearing just about maybe 10, 11 million in cap, which gives the Rangers tons of flexibility in the offseason. And it's a shame because, you know, us as Ranger fans don't really get the luxury of getting a bunch of first round picks that are high. We were fortunate enough to get number 1 and number 2 in 2019 and 2020, but something like this doesn't really happen. So while other teams tend to get a lot of, first round picks, some of them don't pan out. I mean, Taylor Hall didn't really work out much for Edmonton. Now Yakupov. You could even say Sam Reinhart for the Sabres before he got traded. There are numerous examples of team. I mean, Pierre Engvall's another one for Toronto. He was a first-round pick. So we don't really get that opportunity much because the team just always plays well enough. So thankfully, Lafreniere has proven himself to be a top-tier player, and he's going to be this team's best forward for years to come. But Kakko, unfortunately, doesn't really fit that bill unless something drastic changes and they don't trade him in the offseason and he actually comes out, strong in the next season. But all signs point to him getting traded with Jacob Trouba. So now that also begs the question now is, if, let's say, the Rangers do end up getting the cap space, and this isn't even talking about Ryan Lindgren yet. So let's just say the Rangers trade Trouba and Kakko alone. Lindgren is a completely different conversation. You can trade him for, 2 second-round picks, whatever. And I hate to say that because in theory, I like Ryan Lindgren and he's perfect for this team, but you can't justify giving a guy who's oft injured, more than $3 million, because then you're going to run into the same problem that Glenn Sather did when they re-signed Dan Girardi and Mark Stahl. At the time, I could understand why they did that at the time, because there wasn't really much coming through the system, and the fact that, the older regimes like to stick to their guns and keep their guys. They felt that those guys should be rewarded for that. But this is a different case. Drury's been more cutthroat. The Rangers do not need a defenseman who is always going to get injured, and they have a lot more to deal with in terms of talent. So Lindgren, unfortunately, is expendable. So that's why you don't want to give him a big multi-year deal that can really handcuff you with the cap, even if the cap goes up. This is pretty much trying to save a lot of cap. So now you look at potential options. So when there's smoke, there's fire. And Jake Gensel apparently is a top target for the Rangers. So is Patrick Kane. Joel Farabee was a name that was thrown around on a tweet that I saw, but I don't think that's a possibility. You could even throw in Pavel Buchnevich as a potential trade target. Now, I'm just saying that because he was mentioned at the trade deadline. Trevor Zegras has been mentioned as a name for the Rangers to potentially get. But what would it cost? Like, now you have to think, obviously, if they're going to trade Trouba and if they're going to trade Lindgren and Kakko, you obviously need another forward to replace that spot. And also, you would need a defenseman to essentially fill those roles. So now the Rangers have options. You could re-sign Chad Ruedel, who, did not really get a fair shake, which he should have. It's in place of Jacob Trouba. You could sign him to a vet minimum. I've seen Matthew Roy's name be thrown around. I think he plays for the Kings. And then you can also run with Zach Jones. There are options out there. Ideally, what the Rangers should do is put Fox and Miller on the first pair, and then Jones and Schneider as your second pair. And then you fill out the rest. Maybe Matthew Robertson comes in. Maybe there's another guy in Hartford that can come up. And then in terms of Kakko, you can replace him with Brennan Othman or Brett Berard. I really do want to see those two guys essentially kind of find their way, because Berard is a monster at 5-on-5, and Othman, while still has a lot to grow with, can still be a menace because he's just apparently he's just really feisty on the ice. So you have ideally, you can pretty much go with any one of those winger options. Jonathan Marchessault is another one. Heck, you could even probably bring in Steven Stamkos if the price is right. There are a lot of options out there. Me personally, I would love Jake Gensel because he is a playoff performer, and we've seen him kill the Rangers so many different times, and you could use something like that on a line with Kreider and Zibanejad, because you just know, look, I'm just going to say this right now, unless the team really, really decides to essentially do something drastic in that regard, they're not breaking up Kreider and Zibanejad, because it kind of throws off the other lines as well, which I think they should do. But more than likely, they're going to try and get somebody for those two. So now you have to think. Jake Gensel's a good option for one. Another one is Patrick Kane. Now, this one's a bit controversial, for many reasons, of course. We've discussed that in length, but we've had one go around with Kane so far. And now that he's essentially shown that he could play to a somewhat decent level, that seems like an option the Rangers want to go down. And also, there again, where there's smoke, there's fire. There's sort of this like reports going around that Kane wants to come back and have unfinished business with the Rangers. And honestly, it wouldn't be the worst option hockey-wise, because you would definitely get a lot more out of him than you did with Jack Roslovic. And this is not a slight on Roslovic by any means. I really thought Roslovic worked out pretty well with the Rangers. It's just you can kind of tell he kind of got beat up towards the end of the playoffs. He kind of got taken advantage of. So you can get, if you throw in a guy like a Kane or even a Gensel with those, with Kreider and Zibanejad, it could do some, could do some damage for this team. Jonathan Marchessault, that's another option I would love to see them explore. Even though he's a bit on the older side, I think the tenure might be a problem, depending on what he's looking for. But Jonathan Marchessault would be perfect, because not only can he shoot the puck, but he's a very, very, very strong passer, which would benefit Kreider and Zibanejad greatly. And then obviously Steven Stamkos is Steven Stamkos, of course. So obviously it all depends on the money situation, but any one of those guys would be an improvement for that line over Jack Roslovic. Now, ideally, you would hope that the Rangers could find another center, but it doesn't seem like they're really going to move on from Philip Hedl at this point, all things considered, which they shouldn't. And maybe if Hedl's able to break out at the next season, then you still have the deepest center core, regardless of how Zibanejad played throughout the regular season and the playoffs. So, there are a lot of options for this team, and it seems as if Chris Drury is kind of active on trying to get the team to where he wants it to be, because it's shown that he's not afraid to make the move that's unpopular, and definitely a lot different from his predecessors, who were really hell-bent on keeping a lot of their people in. So kudos to Chris Drury for trying to essentially break things up, which is needed, of course. We've talked about that ad nauseum, and we just hope that he can follow through with a lot, because these trades and these off seasons, they're so incredibly fluid that things change from one thing to another. So that's just my thoughts. If you want to hear me ramble on for 26 minutes, if you made it this far, thank you very much for listening. We hope to have some draft coverage for you possibly within the next couple of weeks in terms of who the Rangers could pick. And we're going to keep doing these. And like I said before, we're going to try and give you different types of podcasts. We'll still do these. We'll still do our regular ones with the crew, when the time comes, when something big happens. And, we'll look to try and, experiment with some different audio formats and all that. And, once I, recover fully from this, because if you can tell, I'm really speaking on a lower octave. So my voice isn't really where it should be, because if I talk a little higher, or if I, really go up, you're going to get that. So, excuse me. So that pretty much wraps our, program today. Thank you for taking the time to listen. This will be on YouTube and all of our streaming platforms. And, follow us on the blog, follow us on Twitter. We still talk about the Rangers, and we still put out content. So feel free to continue taking a listen, and we'll definitely have more content coming for you within the next couple of weeks. So this is Producer JL signing off. Just have some thoughts about the Rangers this upcoming weeks. And we'll talk to you soon. And let's go Rangers.